Good morning, everyone. My name is Wesley, Director of Loft Connections. We're back on this Sunday. It's been a week, and it's been a hard week, but one of the things that keeps me grounded is this community, and I just hope that Loft will continue to be an affirming, inclusive space for you, for your loved ones, for your mind, for the intellectualism that we appreciate, and to give us a little sense of what Sundays is going to be about. I kick it over to Terrence, but maybe he has other questions.
Yeah, well, let's have just one question, man. Your background, dude, it keeps changing. It looks even prettier this time. You got like the outdoor shot now. So people definitely said that the background had to go. The whole being held ransom thing was not okay for their pastor. So I was tempted to start working on that, but I decided it might be unnecessary because
The Loft is going live, or to the best of our degree, we're going to host live conversations as part of Sundays. Really trying to give us an opportunity to have Sunday as a place where we're once again reconnecting with one another, enjoying ourselves and each other in conversation, just finding another way to add a layer of community, of belonging, of relationship to what has been a 6-month stint of isolation from the very people that we love. Yeah, we're going live.
Yep, we're excited about that. So up until this point, we've been kind of pre-recording our services and broadcasting them to Facebook Live, and we're going to make a shift to do live Zoom conversation where we'll have similar service elements, but with new music, dialogue with myself and Molly, and then also bringing in some opportunities for live breakout rooms to happen. So the hope is that as closely as possible, we'll try to approximate what we do Sundays on the Loft, but online. Start drawing together more closely as we work through this time together. So glad that you're with us. Today we're wrapping up our Dismantling White Supremacy series. Got a few awesome lofters with us to close up this conversation, but glad you're here. We'll look forward to seeing you live next week.
Rush on ahead, my own strength when you're not here. Lord, I don't wanna rush on ahead in my own strength when you're right here. I'm not in a hurry when it comes to your spirit. When it comes to your presence, when it comes to your voice, I'm learning to listen, just to rest in your nearness. I'm starting to notice you are speaking. Wanna feel what you feel, I wanna see what you see. Lord, I wanna live like you, wanna feel what you feel, wanna see what you see. I'm not in a hurry when it comes to your spirit, when it comes to your presence, when it comes to your voice. I'm learning to listen, just to rest in your nearness. I'm starting to notice you are speaking. No, I'm not in a hurry when it comes to your spirit, when it comes to your presence, when it comes to your voice. I'm learning to listen, just to rest in your nearness. I'm starting to notice you are speaking. Open my wanna see you. Open my ears, I wanna hear you speak. Tell me your thoughts, what's on your mind. I'll be your friend, I wanna see through your eyes. I wanna see through your eyes. See through your eyes. I wanna see through your eyes. I'm not in a hurry when it comes to your spirit, when it comes to your presence, when it comes to your voice. I'm learning to listen, just to rest in your nearness. I'm starting to notice you are speaking. No, I'm not in a hurry when it comes to your spirit, when it comes to your presence, when it comes to your voice. I'm learning to listen, just to rest in your nearness. I'm starting to notice you are speaking.
This is a litany addressing white supremacy by Unfleshed. God, who searches our hearts and calls us to courage, as racist violence against your people and the earth persists, your spirit groans with us over all that is being lost. We come together to lament lives burdened and destroyed, communities criminalized and under-resourced, families torn apart, and lands stolen and plundered. Our lives are entangled in a complicated web of systems, histories, and beliefs. They make it difficult to live as Jesus taught us, to lay down our lives for our friends, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. And so we confess. Too often, our fear prohibits us from being bold in love. We do not do enough to hold ourselves, our communities, and those in power accountable to racial justice. Rather than cast our lot with the most marginalized, where race and other injustices wed, our loyalty is often granted to those most like us. Though prophets surround us, calling us to live and perceive differently, we confess we ignore their pleas. Hear our hearts, delivering one. We do not always recognize the ways that we are complicit with white supremacy, but we know that we are, individually and collectively, that we strive not to be, and that we believe, by your power, O God, we can keep learning, keep growing, and disrupt the cycles of racism that run through our lives, our church, and our world. Forgive us our complacency and lead us on paths of justice. Not even the forces of white supremacy can overcome the power of your love. So rise within us and around us, O God, that your kingdom may come on earth as it is in heaven. Not one day, but today. Through Christ, who liberates the oppressed and frees the captive heart, we pray. Amen.
With white supremacy, one of the things that white supremacy does is obviously it labels and breaks people. And a lot of that time, that's negative stereotyping. But with Asian folks in particular, it can be like positive stereotyping. So this myth of the model minority, etc. And we know that's problematic for all kinds of reasons, like kind of self-selection amongst immigrant communities, and then immigration policies that favor people with advanced degrees as opposed to, there's all kinds of issues as to why that model minority myth exists. As you think about yourself as an Asian person in the midst of this white supremacist system where some folks would look at, Asian folks in either this model minority conception or as less affected or impacted by white supremacy than other marginalized groups, just in terms of economic and educational outcomes. I'm curious how you wrestle with that, both in reference to like white supremacy and its impact on you, but then also your relationship as an Asian person with the broader
Hmm.
POC community and fighting against white supremacy?
Yeah, so I do think I don't think all Asian people are the same, though a lot of Asian people are lumped together, and I know a lot of non-Chinese people assume they're Chinese because that's what happens. Or I don't know if that's true, but I feel like that happens. And um, I think it is a problem because, like I said, uh, Asian people are known to be hard workers. So sometimes maybe it benefits me because I can get away with working less hard at work because people just assume that I got straight A's and worked really, really hard to do what I did, right? Just because I'm Asian. But at the same time, there's less opportunity for me to take like a leadership role because Asian people are seen as less, being less as leaders. So either way, I feel like we really need to dismantle the racism and grouping that, like, if you think about like Chinese communism, like there a huge portion of my life was trying to like make sure I didn't have an accent, to make sure I like ate more foods than just rice and noodles, like making sure that like I was seen as American so that I was not Chinese. And I think in the media we have a really big problem when we label things like China bad, Russia bad, when these are like huge people groups, and you have like progressive people in China and you have progressive people in Russia. Probably, I'm sure there's a lot of great Russian people out there. And when you think about like the Hong Kong riots, I know we don't talk about that a lot in the Loft, but you have like people in Hong Kong speaking up against police brutality as well. You think that maybe the people in China and the citizens are not so different than the people here. Like, it's complicated. You have parties, you have people who are really conservative, and you people who are more progressive and trying to speak up for the freedom of others. Like, all people groups probably have progressive people and conservative people and like different colors of people. And when you paint like all white people with the same brush as like Midwestern conservative, people, that's not true either. That white people, there are so many different types. So we really need to open our eyes to stereotyping.
That's interesting. And I find what you were just saying particularly fascinating because if you're born and raised in the United States and you're a person of color, and you don't have discernible national origin issues, so like Black folks have been in the United States for generations and generations, and so if you're a recent African or Caribbean immigrant, like that, you might have a different perspective there. But
Sure, definitely.
generally speaking, most folks aren't going to judge a given Black African American by what's happening in our relationship with African nations at this stage. I'm curious, like you mentioned, that kind of double bind of both being a minority within the United States, but then also aligned or mentally stigmatized or connected with our international relations with other countries. I feel like I'd love to hear more about kind of how that experience was, like you were describing as growing up, like white supremacy and it forcing you to be Americanized. And if we're calling Americanized being essentially the process of whitening or aligning or submitting to kind of white norms or expectations. What was
Yeah.
it for you growing up, or how are you even still experiencing that today?
Yeah, I think like even in the Chinese American church, like we are, at least the Chinese churches I went to were very conservative and very evangelical. And a lot of that was like very anti-immigrant. Like, we were really anti-China because China is this horrible place that commits human rights problems. And we have been saved by white America, that America is so great that we're here to get a great education and great healthcare if we work really, really hard. And we like almost like throw away our Buddhism and our idols, right? That we're here now, we're worshiping God and Christian, so now we can work in white society. And I think it's funny because when I was raised, like, my parents made a very conscious effort to make me more American. Like, we didn't speak Chinese at home. Like, we only spoke English so I wouldn't have an accent. And my mom made sure she learned how to cook like all the different foods. So she cooked like lasagna and Mexican food and like steaks and stuff. Like, we didn't just eat rice every day because she wanted to make me like assimilate it as much as possible. And it's really funny now because now my cousins are having babies and they only speak Chinese at home, because if you can speak multiple languages, you can get a better job and get paid because the economy is so diverse now. So things have changed on what it looks good to be. But it was interesting, like the church was teaching me to like be anti-immigrant and to like be this certain way because this is the way Christians were supposed to be. The other thing I wanted to speak about was that like the way my parents brought me up was a cause and effect, right? Like my mom gets made fun of her accent, and she has like a bachelor's degree in science. She's like a scientist, and she's worked really hard to get where she is, and she's faced a lot of diversity to prove to everyone that because she's Asian, but that she's also a hard worker, and through her work and her emails are not necessarily grammatically correct. Like there's a reason why our parents did this, right? It's not that they just bought into the Kool-Aid. It's just like they worked really hard to do these things for their children.
These are the streets where mothers cry, drown in the rain of sons and I. This is the town that we've seen burned. We light the flames for hell's return. This is the place that we call home. This is the place I feel alone. Behind the mystery, beyond the pain, beneath the history, kiss the shore, trees dance in the wind. 'Cause even in war, the birds sing. Sun takes the stage, new light field is in. These are the wars we fight for peace. Puzzles we made so incomplete. This is the world that we create. As we compose, we desolate. This is the man I choose to be. Still I deny soul in me. Oh, behind the mystery, beyond the pain, beneath the history, oh, still remains. Even in war, the birds sing. Waves kiss the shore, trees dance in the wind. 'Cause even in war, the birds sing. Sun takes the stage, new light field is in. And even in war, the birds sing. Oh, the waves kiss the shore, trees dance in the wind. And even in war, the birds
This reading is from Esther 4, 1 through 17. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes to him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions.
When I was asking you in terms of dismantling white supremacy and our faithful approach to that, the scripture that seemed to most resonate with you was the story of Esther, and particularly the where, like we're going to read in the scripture today, where you have Esther and Mordecai kind of strategizing around how they're going to respond to this plot to destroy the Jews. And I'm curious why that scripture jumped out to you is so crucial.
So I don't know if this will make a whole lot of sense. And I'll try to make this quick, but Esther's one of my favorite books. I love Esther. I think she's such a strong woman and so smart. And just, I feel like when you have faith, things just turn out, right? And there was an article that came out in the Huffington Post recently. It was a light-skinned Black woman who talked about what people say in front of her because they don't know she's Black. And I get that a lot. Or I'm light-skinned, so people will say things in front of me and think, "Oh, you're not really Black, so this is our safe place." And it's a really great article that I saw in the Huffington Post. And the woman just talks about how people don't realize she's Black, and they talk about Black people in front of her. And, you know, and then this thing from Esther comes out, and I just thought, you know, it's one of those things like, do you come out and say who you are, and confront people knowing what the result is? Or do you kind of fly under the radar and see if you can help in a back way? I don't fly under the radar. But yeah, I mean, the story, it's like, none of this is new, right? It's just history repeating itself. So it really spoke to me. And I love Esther.
That totally resonated with me too. As I was reading through, I went through and was doing like kind of historical and biblical context for that passage. And the concept of like today, obviously with white supremacy and the concept of white passing, like you're mentioning, for those of us who are multiracial or biracial or light skinned, how that changes people's perception of you. And there's, of course, the hierarchy or spectrum of colorism that says, your qualities as being good or bad are related directly in correlation to how light your skin is or how close it approximates whiteness. And so I was fascinated in this story because when you read just this section where Mordecai is telling Esther, hey, you need to step up and not be silent. You need to speak out for your people. Like you're saying, claim your identity and reveal who you are. But it was just a few chapters before that, at the very beginning of the book of Esther, where Mordecai is telling Esther, don't reveal who you are. Don't show your nationality. Because in this beauty contest of sorts that Esther had competed in for a position, Mordecai knew this is going to be like problematic. When people find out who you are, that might be disadvantageous. So it's interesting that, you find this tension even in the text between Mordecai, who you're thinking in one chapter sounds like this guy's like repping it, keep it real, be who you are. And then a few chapters earlier, he's like, just pass, use that as your tool to kind of sneak through the oppressive system. Yeah, I'm curious in your own life, kind of how you experienced managing and balancing that kind of dichotomy.
Yeah. So I'm a pretty outspoken person, and it's interesting because I have a sister and she recently started, being more outspoken, but she would always do things like bleach her skin and try to be friends with white people and do things to try to fit in, where I've always been like, what, like looking for, something, or people say stuff, I do say stuff, but it gets old and it gets painful, especially when I learn how people view me. And this year I've lost close friends because when this stuff started coming out with Black Lives Matter and people started being more vocal, and I got to see some of their views, and I realized, like, wow, you didn't know you had a Black friend, or you knew I was your Black friend, but like I worked for you because of some of, my traits. But yeah, I get what I describe as microaggressions frequently. And I think because I spend most of my time at work, I get most of it at work. And living in Los Angeles, being from Minnesota, I get more here, which is surprising, right? It's a big city. You'd think people are, pretty woke. But I get you're not really Black, or I'm Blacker than you, like skin color, or your hair is red, and well, like these questions as though I'm asking your opinion. So a lot of that, and a lot of, well, you're white too, and it's like, well, I didn't create the one drop rule. So you guys want to get rid of that, and you don't need to classify me. We can just call me female, human, she, her, if you want, but you guys needed to classify. So if you need to do that, then legally I'm Black. So yeah, a lot. So I deal with that a lot. And I do not hide or giggle when people make those comments and then stew about them later. I say something.
I've often heard, like, especially back in my seminary days, this concept or quote that the job of any good preacher is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. So if we were aiming for the latter in terms of afflicted and comfortable, part of me thinks as we get through the end of this series, if we haven't afflicted people, if they're not offended, or if their status quo internally hasn't been disrupted, then we've probably failed in the series. Because if we're taking on this overarching thing that's like responsible for the center of oppression in the Western world and beyond, if we don't actually hit something. So I'm curious, as you thought about things that you shouldn't say in church or shouldn't address directly, like that polite company wouldn't tackle, I'm curious if there's anything that like needs to be said that would offend, but that we might be tempted to hold back because we're in church together and we care for one another. But just like if there's any of those bombs that just need to be dropped, that would leave people leaving the series being like, oh, they went straight for the jugular, and that's good.
You know, I'm glad you said that, because as I say things, I try to be really careful, because like, I don't want to offend allies as we're trying to get allies to get us fair treatment, right? And then when you said that, I'm like, yeah, that's right. We get to say stuff. But in the church, I've actually felt very comfortable in the Loft. I have, and so I don't know that I would say anything there. Just in general, you know, it starts. I mean, I just have so many things to say. I'll just say, everyone, we all need to look at ourselves. We all need to check ourselves. And even if we think we don't, if you don't see color, you do. Everyone sees color, and I want you to see color. I want you to be like, Mari, she's that Black woman with the red curly hair. That's who I am. So like, I want you to see color. I don't want you to be like, oh, I don't care if you're purple or blue. You should care if I'm purple or blue, because that means I'm dying. And you know, this, I don't see color, I don't care what you are, like, you should. Like, ethnicity is nothing for me to be ashamed of. I'm happy to be Black. I want to be Black. I don't want to change it. I don't like what's happening with Black people, but I don't go to bed at night praying to be white. But see color, accept color, celebrate color. And, you know, we're proud of who we are, but we don't want to be told like, we just call you human. Like, no, like, I'm Black and I'm proud to be Black.
I've read a couple authors recently who've used this concept of, to your point, where a little kid and a parent are in a grocery store and a Black man walks by and the little white kid shouts out, "Mommy, mommy, it's a Black guy," or "Why is his skin black?" And then the mom being like, and this concept that like every white parent who has the kid who calls out, "Mommy, why is his skin black?" like has to come to terms with like the sense of embarrassment or shock or whatever that comes in that moment, and then they have to mitigate. They're like, "Honey, no, don't say that. We don't say those things." Yeah. That kind of thing. But like contrasting that is if the man walked by and the little kid yelled out, "Mommy, mommy, that guy is so handsome." And then everybody would giggle politely and be like, "Oh, that's so sweet." And so the question is just like, the authors raised is just like, why is it problematic to name that this person is Black or that their skin is Black, as though if that produces anxiety and fear, like naming that thing, as opposed to that person's really smart or that person's beautiful, like that somehow those things are acceptable. And so it's like, what has white supremacy culture done, that system, that to what you're describing is just simply naming the identity is thought of as disparaging or worse? Like owning that and like determining like what is really driving that is crucial.
Yeah. And it comes from parents. And it's interesting you brought up the grocery store story, because I have this story from years ago. I was in the grocery store and this kid was like, "Mom," and he points at me and I'm like, "Oh no." And he's, "Why does that lady have polka dots?" And the mom was like, you guys can't see me, I have a lot of freckles. And the mom was horrified. She's like, "Honey, we don't say that." And I just bent down and I was like, "Those are angel kisses." And he's like, "Wow, angel kisses." And then I went on, but I walked away and I'm like, polka dots. But, you know, it starts with the kids. Like, we have to, you know, they learn at home, you know, and you're right. Like the grocery store story with the Black man is interesting. And how should a parent answer that? They just say, "Yep, mom, there's a Black man." Yep. I mean,
or ask themselves, why is this the first time my child is seeing a Black man? Why is it like, what is normative about the people that I'm centering myself around, and trying to figure out how to navigate that well, because to your point, like labeling and naming is so powerful. When a kid sees your freckles, like if someone's offended by that or like shocked that they would have said that, your willingness to rename or re-narrate that thing. And so if white supremacist culture naturally is going to tell you to fear black folks, that they're dangerous, that they're less intelligent, etc., you as a parent have to commit like early on, if you're a white parent and as a parent of color as well, to figure out how you're going to rename and shift those labels so that as your child's imagination is growing, if you do nothing to educate your kid or to shape their mind, they 100% will be guaranteed to have a white supremacist mindset at the end of their upbringing, unless you intentionally interject those moments where you're speaking into things that otherwise will just be subconsciously taken for granted. And so figuring out where as a parent you're going to interject and break the cycle of white supremacy is critical if you're going to be a faithful kind of Christian parent to try to break the system and raise your kids faithfully.
Yep.
I got troubles, Lord, but not today. 'Cause they're gonna wash away. They're gonna wash away. And I have sins, Lord, but not today. 'Cause they're gonna wash away. They're gonna wash away. And I had friends, Lord, but not today. 'Cause they done washed away. They done washed away. And oh, I've been crying. Oh, I've been crying. No, no more crying. And no, no more crying here. And we get lonely, Lord, but not today. 'Cause we gonna wash away. We gonna wash away. We get lonely, Lord, but not today. 'Cause we gonna wash away. We gonna wash away. I got trouble, Lord, but not today. 'Cause they're gonna wash away. They're gonna wash away. And I got troubles, Lord, but not today. 'Cause they're gonna wash away. This old heart's gonna take them away.
Hi everyone, here we are in Big Bear Lake. We're going to read Proverbs 31, 1 through 9. The sayings of King Lemuel, and inspired utterances that his mother taught him. Most people think that King Lemuel is actually King Solomon. And we all know King Solomon's mother is Bathsheba. So this is most likely Bathsheba talking to her son Solomon. Listen, my son. Listen, son of my womb. Listen, my son. The answer to my prayers. Do not spend your strength on women, or your vigor on those who ruin kings. It is not for kings, Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine. It is not for rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, and deprive all of the oppressed of their rights. Let beer be for those who are perishing. Let wine be for those who are in anguish. Let them drink and forget their poverty, and remember their misery no more. But you, speak up, for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy.
Robin DiAngelo, in her book White Fragility, makes the analogy to women's voting rights and talk about how literally women couldn't didn't have the voice to take the right to vote because men controlled the legislature that determined whether or not women could vote. Like, their voices ultimately had to be spoken. They had to cast a vote to be able to allow women to vote because they controlled, through a system of oppression, the ability to do that. You mentioned, as we've kind of chatted, how important white silence is to address as it relates to dismantling white supremacy. I'm curious your thoughts on kind of where you found that to be so important for you and the community in general.
Yeah, and before we switch that, I do want to say one thing about that example, and I think it's very easy to see, like, well, how does what I do make a difference? Like, really, am I going to do anything? But the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote passed by one vote in the Tennessee legislature because his mom called him before he cast his vote, and it was a tie in the Tennessee legislature, which was the final state that had to pass it to ratify. And it passed by one vote based on him having a conversation with his mom. And so I think it's interesting when we think, like, does an individual really have the capacity to make a difference? And it's like, yes, we do. And if we stop thinking that we do, then that's a real problem because we really can. So sorry to take away from what the question, but I think for me, the white silence piece came into play, or at least came into my awareness in a new way, because I think, I would squarely describe myself in the category of the white people who thought they were good. Growing up, like, we had Black neighbors and we had diverse friends and, my parents refused to move to the suburbs in the bubble of only white people. And things like that, and they're pretty progressive in their, views on a lot of those kinds of issues. And so I think I just viewed myself as being good, and so I didn't have, and for me that translated to, well, I'm fine, so we're good over here. And it was very much I was on the bench. And I didn't do anything because I didn't see that I had any work to do or any growth to happen. And B, I didn't see that I had a role to play in making any kind of change. And so I think, at least for me, it was when I saw that I realized the silence piece is one of the most problematic ways that white people fail to address systemic oppression and white supremacy, because we think we're good and that we don't have anything to do, which couldn't be further from the truth.
You mentioned, and this is so powerful, like as you're describing, like, white exceptionalism there, like this notion that, like, I don't have any work to do, this isn't something that concerns me, or I don't have to be concerned about the rights of the poor and needy, like that's not something that applies because I'm a good person. That model, I think, sits in a way that it causes inaction. And I'm curious, you had mentioned when we've talked previously that you were probably doing more harm than good because in that period of time in your life, because it was early in your sense of allyship. And so there was this idea that, like, I'm not a racist, and so there's nothing happening. So I found surprisingly that actually reinforces white supremacy, because the actual work that needs to be done that's sitting beneath the surface can't be done. I'm curious, what alerted you or helped you to transition from that place of, like, not racist or not bad to, like, understanding that allyship involved deeper work? What turned that switch for you?
I think it was part of my overall deconstruction, journey of deconstructing and reconstructing my faith system, because I think there's a couple of things that I think are problematic about dominant Christian narratives. but one is this emphasis on this binary of good or bad, like be a good girl, or that's a bad guy, or you know, oh, they're kind of trouble. Like we have these like good, bad, in, out labels that we like to put on people, kind of coming from the evangelical perspective of like, are they in heaven or are they out of heaven? Did they get in? Did they, like, we have this sense of good and bad that we stamp people with. And I think it makes us more afraid of a challenge to that piece of our identity, because it's often very integrated in our personal identities. Like, I was a good girl. That was a big part of my identity. I followed all the rules. I made all the right choices. I played by the book, and because everything about what I was told was that was what I had to do. And being told I wasn't good was a huge wrench in the identity piece if it had just come on its own without the deconstruction of all of what that surrounded that. And I think people who've always viewed themselves as like they have to be good in order to get XYZ, telling them that they aren't good is a massive identity disruptor, where it shouldn't be, because we shouldn't have those fundamental identity pieces either, because no one's just good or just bad or any of those things. They're incredibly problematic frameworks to have. But I think for me, I probably wasn't ready to even see it, because I was so afraid of not being seen as good. And I think that's why I like the anti-racism framework that has become much more commonly used, at least I know it's always been used with people of color, but at least in white circles, people are much more aware of what that actually looks like. Because if the mark is like, are you racist or not, it implies that there's a point of arrival that is just not true. And so you either see yourself as having already arrived and therefore having no more work to do, or it's like this point of arrival that exists somewhere, versus being anti-racist, which is a lifelong engagement in making things better, and seeing that you have a role to play in doing so. And I think it's a much more helpful framework, because it's not about like labeling people good or bad or in or out or any of those things. It's about saying like, hey, you're white. It means that you're racist. And it means that you show up in racist ways that you're not even aware of. And that's okay, because every white person is that way, but it's not okay to just stay there. Now we all have work to do. And it's not some big identity piece of now you're no longer good or any of those things, but it's a call and an invitation into action that I think is a much, I think it, not that we should pander to white people in the way we speak, but I think it's much less scary for people, because it's an invitation into something versus a label as something negative, which is what people shy away from and are afraid of, because so many people have their identities built around like these kind of core, like positive attributes of their identity and personality. So yeah, I think that's been an important part of it for me as well.
As we wrap up today's service and our Dismantling White Supremacy series as a whole, I just want to take a couple moments to share some closing thoughts with you about where we've been and where we're headed as the Loft. To start off, Mari and I were having the conversation about the book of Esther, and one of the things that stuck out from that book and that story was at the end of the story, as Esther is celebrating all that God has done to deliver her people, she tells the community to institute a new holiday called Purim, which was an opportunity for them to celebrate the deliverance that God had done. I think she pushed that and wanted that to happen for two reasons. The first is, in the midst of the darkest of times, having a reminder that when your people faced literal extinction from the face of the earth as a result of state-sponsored violence, even in that time, God's deliverance can show up. Think about in our time, We have, even just this week, Breonna Taylor's killers not facing charges from the grand jury, and thinking that this wasn't the first time in Israel's history, and certainly wouldn't be the last time, that state-sponsored violence, that oppression and injustice would face them. And we know in our day and age, this is yet another instance of injustice that wouldn't be the first time and certainly won't be the last, but that we as people of God know that justice, that hope, that deliverance is on our side, and that as we work together perpetually and consistently as a community to make those things happen, that we will see justice. And so grateful for the gift of the story of Esther as a reminder to us of the hope and possibility for God and God's people. I think what's also beautiful, and I think part of what Esther had in mind in implementing this holiday, was the importance of God's people being together in community, sharing meals and giving to those in need, to be able to be close and support each other in the midst of very dark and challenging times. I know for the Loft, that's been, in our time, particularly tricky. It would be a gift to be together in person, but until or unless that happens, the Loft team has been trying to think through how do we best meet the needs of the folks in our community and help bring us together in the midst of these challenges. And so we've decided for the month of October, we're going to move to a live worship service format. So what we've been doing up until this point has been pre-recording services and then playing them on Facebook Live, largely to avoid latency issues and those kind of things that come with trying to do that live. But we've decided that we're going to shift to a format where we'll be on Zoom. So as Wesley and I mentioned, starting next Sunday, the first Sunday in October, we'll be starting a new series and coming together online. So you'll receive an email, text with a Zoom link where you can join, hop on, and we'll be working to make the service as close an approximation to a live Loft service, like in-person one, as possible online. So we'll have new music, you'll have myself and Molly and rich dialogue, and then have plenty of time for breakout conversations with fellow Lofters. So we're grateful for you joining us in this series, for staying connected while we're all so far apart, and looking forward to what we'll be starting next week, and look forward to having you together with us as we start making steps to try to be closer and closer as we support each other during this time and keep doing the work that God is calling us to do together. Thanks, and have a great week.